people who kill themselves may not be mentally ill. They may actually have a life that they've just mentally checked out on. They've looked at their situation, they've tried to fix it, and they just have nowhere to go.
Has therapy failed men? Should men even go to therapy? This is going to be a fantastic discussion today. Welcome back to the Wilson Brothers channel. I'm David. Isaac is in Dubai, so he misses out. This is my buddy JP Don Parmesan.
How we doing?
We're going to get it on today. I have not seen this. I scrolled through my feed. Therapy in men is something that a lot of people think you should. What kind of therapy should you have? Have they failed man? So we're going to dig right into this. Let's see how it goes.
Why does therapy so often suck for men?
So there are a couple of reasons for this. The first is that I think we have a misunderstanding. Somewhere along the way, we got the impression that talking about our emotions is the best way to handle them. So I think we have a bias about our understanding of emotions. We think, first of all, they're primarily mental. Secondly, we think that talking about them is the way to go. And therapy is the best evidence-based approach that we've got, basically historically, of dealing with your emotions. But I think there are a couple of biases. The first is that the majority of therapists are women, and the majority of patients are also women, historically. Which means that if you're looking at a population and you say talking about emotions really works for my patients, if you're just the therapist, we don't really segregate between our male patients and our and our female patients. We sort of like look at this and we say like, this is what works. Now, there are lots of trials that actually show the opposite of that. So we'll have trials on cognitive behavioral therapy that look at 50% men, 50% women. Both of them have good effect sizes. But there too, I think there's a selection bias. Because even if you're looking at success in therapy, you're not counting all the people who left.
That didn't go to therapy in the first place.
Because talking about emotions did not work for them. There's even a really interesting paper, so there's a lot of exploration into this. And one paper actually points out that there are two kinds of therapy that you can give. One is what we call emotionally supportive therapy, where you talk about your emotions. And the second is something called instrumental support, which is like problem solving. And what we tend to find is that—
So real quick, that's fascinating for me, because I do find it hard at times to actually talk to women about my emotions and how I'm feeling. But I've always found it much easier to talk to guys, because guys tend to be more solution-based. How can I help you get out of your situation? How can we create a plan to get you to where you want to be? But if it's just me about my issues, that's not really helping me. I mean, sometimes, yes, we need to vent to our wives and everything, right? But women and men in therapy need to be treated differently. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody comes from a different place and a different trauma profile, if you will, right? So like we all go through things in our childhood that kind of shape us, right? Good things, bad things. There's these foundations in our lives that I think are really kind of determining our future in a lot of aspects. So I think it's interesting when you talk about like the emotional side of it. I grew up in like a very like tight-knit, like religious background. So like,
and you're Italian, bro.
Oh, my family was just
get over it. What's wrong with you? Get up, you.
It was a very interesting dynamic in that fact. Yeah, you either had my dad like being that way, you know, like what are you talking about? What's the matter with you? You're fine.
Yeah.
But growing up in like a therapy type background, like my like quote unquote mentor like was a female. So it was a lot of emotionally driven responses. So I think a lot of the ways that I was raised to think about things was from not a problem solving perspective. And it really affected me growing up because I was always looking at things from an emotional standpoint. So then dealing with things like at my job and like other areas when I started to grow up, I struggled because I didn't know how to just think about it in a very like black and white area, you know, everything, or I guess more gray. Like it was very black and white. It was like, well, I feel this way. And it's like, well, that doesn't matter. Like this is the real world. Like your feelings and emotions need to be kind of dismissed in that. So it's an interesting point for sure.
Yeah. I have a ton of other thoughts, but I'm going to let him finish what he was saying. But yeah, that's very interesting.
Men prefer problem solving. But if you look at therapy training, we are actively disincentivized to problem solve with our patients. We're not there to solve your problems.
Yeah.
So when I was like a second year psychiatry resident, and I had this 16-week therapy course where I'm learning the basics of therapy. And, you know, one of the teachers came in and was like, if a patient walks in and says, can you help me find a girlfriend? What's the right answer? And then the right answer is that help me understand why you think you can't find one. Help me understand why you want one. Let's talk about it. The answer is not yes, right? So as therapists, we're not very good as a whole profession at like helping people solve problems. And I think especially if you look at men, there's a lot of disturbing data on diseases of despair. So between, I think, like 2009 and 2018, suicide-related diagnoses in people under the age of 18 went up by 287%. So what's happening right now, especially if you look at male mental health, is we're starting to realize that there's another study, for example, that there are a couple of studies that show that somewhere between 37 and 66.7% of men who commit suicide, somewhere between 37 and 66%, have no history of mental illness. So what we're starting to realize is there's a very troubling signal that we're seeing that people who kill themselves may not be mentally ill. They may actually have a life that they've just mentally checked out on. They've looked at their situation, they've tried to fix it, and they just have nowhere to go. We're seeing this especially
That's really deep, man. Because
that is so deep, bro.
Oh
man.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, like my background, I come from a history of addiction. So I think it's very easy to be in a situation where what your reality is, I have a tattoo, it's perception is reality. I think we've talked about it. And like what your reality is to you isn't always real, but you live that. So your perception is your reality. And I think a lot of times for people when they're going through these like dark times, it's so hard to see life outside of that bubble. Because especially like for drugs and alcohol and things like that, it's almost like there's like a cloud around you and you don't really see outside of that cloud. And I'm just using this as like a very specific example. Like there's really a lot of areas we could look at. You could be a well-accomplished individual with a good job, making good money. You have a wife, you have kids, you have, friends, all these different things. But maybe there's just something internally that you've been battling for years. It could be pornography, right? Like there's a lot of different aspects, but I'm just using this as an example. But I think for me, it was so hard because it became this sense of like, I didn't really have happiness outside of that. But what I didn't realize was I was self-medicating. I needed to have something to give me this piece of life that I was looking for, right? So point being with that, it's so interesting because I've had a lot of friends in my past, like in that life that like they're gone now. And it's really hard to look back because their reality was, if you really look at where things were, they didn't see a way out. And it's hard, man, when you're like grinding every day, especially nowadays, it's so hard to live financially for people to get on top. Like you can look at your situation and be like, I'm never going to get out of this.
Yeah, people perish because of a lack of purpose.
Yeah.
And I've noticed in my life, I've checked out so many different times, and it always comes back to one thing. I didn't take action towards something that I saw hope in. And a lot of men live a life of suffering because they don't see hope.
Yeah.
They're working at their dead-end job, or they're trying to provide for a family working at Target, right? And they don't feel like they have any skills. They don't know what to do. And so that's why for me, the best therapy I've had in my entire life was watching David Goggins. We both have, because it wasn't, hey, I see how you're feeling, man. Just life is going to be okay, and all these things. I've had people, and that's kind of like what you have your wife for,
because
like,
I don't care what
that
happens
from our
to
wife.
you.
Sometimes we just need our wife being like, babe, I trust you. You got this. And that's the best therapy for us. But having David Goggins screaming at me and saying, stop being a bum.
Yeah.
You can actually do difficult things and change your life.
Yeah.
And now taking action will actually change that. And that is the difference between men and women. There are some women that do respond to that message. I know a lot of women that have.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, women want you to hold their hand and just be like, it's going to be okay. I know that you're going through this difficult time.
Yeah.
But if I said to a woman, just get up off your butt, stop being lazy. You're in your own head all the time. Get out there, change the world. They don't see it as, well, hey, I just want you to be here for me. It's a different kind of response. Not
funny,
saying one's better than the other.
Yeah.
But we are hardwired differently.
I was having a conversation with someone recently, and they wanted me to have a conversation with someone that we're close with. And the way they described it was, listen, don't give your opinion and don't give a perspective outside of what they have to say. And it was for a female. And the reason they were saying that was because this person, when spoken to in certain ways, can feel as though they're being shut down. Mm-hmm. And from an emotional standpoint, I think that's a very valid point. And like you said, from the way you're hardwired, and like, I'm not a woman, so I can't speak from that perspective,
Correct.
but from my experience, I think that's
Correct.
very accurate in that sense. But it's interesting, man, because I do think, what is it? Rogan had said it, like most men live lives of quiet desperation, you know, and
just suffering in silence.
yeah, because, and a lot of times I think it's hard as a man, you do have different responsibilities. Like my wife, like I look at her, for example, like she works very hard. She takes care of our son very religiously. You know, she does a lot to make sure the house looks great. She does things because she wants to be a servant. It's her heart to do that.
Yep.
And when I see her do those things, it makes me want to do the things that I have to do even more, right? It's like cleaning the house isn't her job. It's something she does because she loves our home and she wants to respect me and our home and herself and our child. And it's the same for me. It's like, you know, she had said many months ago, she's like, saying I'm going to help you with the baby and change the diaper makes it as if that's my job. It's our job as parents, right? So we're doing that collectively. So I think there is a paradigm shift that takes place when you're a dad where you're like, oh, let me help you with that. And it's like, it's your kid. You know what I mean? Like we're doing that together. So I think it's interesting because there is aspects of masculinity that get diluted, I think, in a lot of ways with culture. But I do think his point is very valid in the sense that women do just respond differently more times than not. I'm sure there's women that are, I mean, problem solving. You give them, hey, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to work through. But Goggins, like, I mean, first time you listen to him, it's like, I connected so deeply because bro's message is dark. My guy comes from a dark place.
He does, bro.
He's coming from a place of like pure, like the depths of hell.
It's
like
so true,
if you
bro.
listen to his story, like I've been on runs, like literally weeping because this guy's story, it's like, it's so bad. And then he says something and you're like, it gets worse. Like, how does this guy's life get worse? And he just keeps pushing and he keeps going forward. And I saw a video a couple weeks ago where there was this mom at a rally, a Goggins rally. And I don't know how she got called on, but she was basically just thanking him. She's like, my son was suicidal.
You sent that to me.
Yes.
You said,
And he's like,
call him up right now. Call him up right now.
And he's talking to him and he's like, brother, I'm so proud of you. Like, so
that's
thankful for your...
that's the difference between different famous people that try to speak into men.
Yeah.
It's somebody that challenges you but celebrates your victories.
They're not too proud.
Yeah, they're not like, well, you know, you're just not where I'm at. You know, they're like, hey, you're in the depths, you're in the dirt. Now that you got out of that, let's celebrate this together.
100%.
Let's see if he has anything else to say, but this is very insightful.
Yeah, great.
As we see things like changes in our economic situation, changes in employment or underemployment, there's a lot of economic forces that are affecting men. And so now the problem is that, especially when I work with my male patients, what I see is sometimes when they come in, they'll say, okay, I feel suicidal, I have low self-esteem, okay, I diagnosed you with depression. Tell me about your life. I'm 30 years old, I have no job, I've never been in a relationship. And so like, what would this person look forward to?
Yeah.
Right? And so a big part of helping them is not just talking about your problems. A big part is helping them build a life. And that's not something we're trained in as therapists.
Does this require an entire new type of therapy? It almost, to me, based on what I know about the definitions of therapy, almost sounds like it gets into some kind of coaching in a way.
Yes. So I think that's why coaching has emerged as a field, right? So I think that what started happening at some point is therapists stopped focusing on material outcomes for their patients. So if you look at how we judge the quality of a therapist, it's the reductions in their depression scores, anxiety scores, which I think is completely reasonable, right? That like makes sense because that's what our job is. But we certainly don't measure things like promotion or what percentage of people get married and things like that, which is if you really look at like what makes people's lives worth living, it's those kinds of achievements. And even if we look at, so the really fascinating thing is if we look at the evidence-based methods of therapy for diagnoses that are predominantly men, we see more action. So a great example of this is something called motivational interviewing. So if you look at addictions, the majority of people who have addictions are men. And if we look at what is the best evidence-based technique, maybe not best, but one very effective evidence-based technique, it's something called motivational interviewing, which is all about getting people to do shit. Yeah. It's not about talking about your feelings.
So
we're not going to examine your...
That's funny.
That's so good.
When I first came on here with you and we talked about my story and you asked me, what's your definition of a, alpha male or whatever however you worded it. And my response was a man of action, right? So I think a lot of times people are looking for
high value man. That's what I said.
Yes. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are looking for a way to represent themselves instead of just looking at a very simple factor. What am I doing?
Yeah.
Like, not what do I talk about, not what do I think, which are very important things, because what you speak is what you create in your atmosphere. What you think is what you create in your body, which then comes out of you. So these are very important factors, but it's what you do on a daily basis. You could have a ton of anxiety. You could be the most negative person in the world, and your actions will follow that. But if you start doing the things that are necessary for your life, I would very strongly disagree with someone that would say that wouldn't affect anything.
You know, it's so true, because most people, what do men want? Specifically men. Men want to make some kind of change or a difference. It doesn't matter what you're in. You want to be the first to something. You want to impact somebody. You want to make a lasting change that when you're gone will still continue. It can be with your family, whatever that is. Yeah. All of that requires action. And so I've even looked at my own life, and I refuse to stay in my pit of despair that I've had, because my life is so short, and I want to be known as somebody that made a difference and made a change. And so everything this guy is saying is fascinating, because that's one reason I've never wanted to go to therapy. Is because it's just talking about, how do I feel in this moment? Yes, my feelings are valid, but I talk about that with my wife. Yeah. And she's very supportive in that. What can a therapist give me? Maybe some tools, but if they don't give me something to actually get out of it and to be able to change it by doing things, then I don't feel like I would get much out of it. That's why certain people think therapy is one of the dumbest things you can do.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I know someone that they've said, like, we talked about therapy, and they're like, I don't want to go to therapy. Yeah. What am I going to talk about my feelings? Like, it happened. What am I going to do with that? Yeah. But it's so interesting, because that point he's making is, if you were to talk to someone and say, hey, we're not going to sit down and talk about the stuff you've gone through and like just share your feelings, like let's problem solve. Like, okay, you went through these things. What is it doing to you today? How can we work through those? What are resolutions we can bring to your life?
See, that's why I have brothers like you, though, because we are therapy to each other in a way. Yeah. We literally, that's what we do. Is we're like, bro, I know you've had it tough, man. You've just gone through this. Let's go to the gym. Let's bang it out. Let's create a plan of how we're going to get out of it. Not actually bang it out. But speaking of that, we love you guys. We'll see you on the next video. Don't forget to subscribe. We're coming out with content Monday through Friday. More content like this, just stuff, tools that men can have to change their life. So see you guys in the next video.
Thanks, guys.
Peace.